Question number 2 this week, and this is the long one. Question number 2 this week. Kylie Burns sends in, "Hey there, Brian. Big fan here. Been listening to your content since The Force Awakens came out. I love how your channel has grown and wanted to say congrats on your little youngling coming soon." Thank you very much, Kylie. I do appreciate that very, very much. I'm glad to have you as a follower. I did not like The Last Jedi. If you can rebuttal any of the following, I am open to looking at it differently. Here we go. These are some of the problems Kylie had with The Last Jedi. It's stupid to have a droid say the famous line, "I have a bad feeling about this." It was totally out of character for Luke to just drop everything and go into hiding. We've never heard of ships using fuel before the Disney era. Force communication didn't kill Luke and Leia in The Empire Strikes Back. Why did it kill Luke in The Last Jedi? When was it established that Force ghosts could interact with the physical world? Why were the turbo laser beams from the Finalizer arcing in space? Why is Leia all of a sudden able to use the Force to save herself when we've never seen her use it before? I'd like to hear your opinion on these topics, and how can you still call it a Star Wars movie with those flaws? Keep up the great work, Brian. Thanks for the question, Kylie, and that's a hell of a question. So we're going to unpack it. I'm going to go through this bit by bit, one by one. So here we go. Where was the beginning of it? Let me see here. Okay. It's stupid to have a droid say the famous line, "I have a bad feeling about this." 3PO said it in Return of the Jedi. As they're walking into Jabba's palace, he goes, "Oh, R2, I have a bad feeling about this," as they stumble off into the distance. BB-8 is not the first droid to use that phrase. Now, granted, he's the first one to use it that you couldn't understand what he was saying, and that the director had to physically come out and say, "Oh, no, it was BB-8 that said it." That was kind of BS. I do agree with that. But there's nothing wrong with the droid saying it. K2 tried to say it in Rogue One, but he got cut off. "I have a bad feeling." K2, shut up. That happened. There's how many times is that line's in every damn movie, and how many people have said it? It's insane. It's everywhere. So I have no problem with BB-8 saying it. I did kind of have a problem with the director having to come out and say, "Oh, he's the one that said it," because after The Last Jedi came out, I did look at Kirsty and go, nobody said I have a bad feeling about this. And I was kind of like, well, that's kind of bizarre. And then when the director came out and said, when Rian Johnson came out and said, no, it was in there, it was just BB-8 that said it, I was like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. And I had no problem with it, So if you didn't like it, I understand that. But personally, I liked it. Let's see here. It was totally out of character for Luke to just drop everything and go into hiding. Look, with this whole Luke Skywalker thing, the quote-unquote character assassination of Luke Skywalker, okay, and I know there's a lot of people that agree with you. I am personally one that does not, and there's nothing wrong with that. Just because I disagree with you doesn't mean I think you're an idiot or stupid or anything like that. This is just my personal opinion, okay? There are 30 years of content there that we have yet to fill. We don't know every little thing that Luke Skywalker went through. This is Luke Skywalker. This is not the same Luke Skywalker from Return of the Jedi. This is not the same, bright-eyed farm boy that wanted to escape Tatooine anymore. This is a Luke Skywalker that has seen some shit. This is a Luke Skywalker that his aunt and uncle were killed by the Empire. He watched Obi-Wan die. He watched Yoda die. He watched his father die. He watched his apprentice turn to the dark side and destroy his new Jedi Order. His nephew, it's his nephew. That would break anybody. And we have to get off this, we have to take Luke off this pedestal as some Messiah character just because the EU made him out to be some Messiah all-powerful Force user. The man's still human. The man still has emotions. He still has flaws. He's still learning. And it's you have to take Luke off that pedestal and actually look at him as a human being, because when he's a human being, he's way more relatable. You can't relate to an all-powerful God figure wizard with a laser sword. You can't do that. You can't relate to that. Sure, that's cool in a novel. Yeah, that's awesome to a story, having an all-powerful... But look at The Force Unleashed. You had this, all-powerful... Which, by the way, were good games, I will say that. But you had this all-powerful character that could just do it and rip Star Destroyers out of the sky. I mean, it's as fun as that was in the game. It doesn't really make a lot of sense that somebody could be that powerful and their body could hold on to that power. You know, so you have to humanize your characters just a little bit. And this character assassination of Luke Skywalker, quote unquote, I don't think is actually there. This is a man that's been jaded by the Force. What did the Force ever do for Luke? Through his entire life, what did the Force ever do for Luke? I need an answer, you know? So, I mean, it's him running off and hiding. Hell, the only two mentor figures he ever had in his life both ran away and hid in exile. What else does he think he's supposed to do? Obi-Wan took Luke to Tatooine, went into exile to hide, so the Emperor and Vader couldn't find him. Yoda, straight off the bat after being defeated by Sidious, failed I have, into exile I must go. And he goes to Dagobah to hide. I mean, he ran away from the problems. You know, I mean, that's all he ever knew. That's the only example that was ever set for him. So it makes total sense, to me anyway. You know, and to have Yoda's Force Ghost pop up there and correct Luke and tell him, no, you're wrong. I've been around 900 years longer than you were. I know what's going on. You were wrong. You should have passed this on and this on. You should have done this. And what did Luke do in the long run? He came back, which we're going to talk about here in a second. He came back. He sacrificed his life to still be that hero, that image that the galaxy needed, that spark of hope that they kept talking about in The Last Jedi. I don't see anything wrong with the way Luke Skywalker was handled. I mean, and nobody was really talking about the way Luke Skywalker was handled when The Force Awakens came out, when they told us, when Han Solo stood on the Millennium Falcon and looked Rey and Finn in the eye and said he ran away from everything. An apprentice turned on him and he ran away from everything. What were we expecting? Like what Luke said in The Last Jedi, what were we expecting was going to happen? That he was just going to go with them and face down the whole First Order with a laser sword? Is that what we were expecting? Luke saying that to Rey was Luke saying it to the audience. Because we knew in The Force Awakens that that's what state Luke was in. That's the mindset Luke was in. I don't know why we expected anything different. So, and I didn't hear anybody raising hell then when Luke Skywalker ran off. I'm just saying. And maybe I didn't change your mind. Hopefully I did. But maybe I didn't, and that's fine. But that's just my opinion on the Luke Skywalker thing. Let's see here. Where else? We've never heard of ships using fuel before the Disney era. Yes, we have. There were several times in the classics. Well, I don't want to say several times in the classics. There were several times throughout the last 6 films where fuel was an issue. Where, I mean, episode 1, Obi-Wan says, you know, hey, here's a planet, Tatooine. It's poor. It's sparse, out of the way, poor. But the Hutts have no presence there. And Qui-Gon says, we need somewhere to land and refuel the ship. Refuel the ship. Even in... Revenge of the Sith. Obi-Wan makes the comment when he lands on Utapau, I need fuel and supplies for my starfighter. You know, I need fuel and supplies when he was there to defeat Grievous, when he was there to confront Grievous. In Empire Strikes Back, which is being marked down still as the greatest Star Wars movie ever, tied with some people with Jedi, where Han says we need to find somewhere to make repairs and refuel. And I mean, it's not the first thing. It's not the first time that's ever been brought up. It's the first time it was a major plot device. Yes. But it's not the first time it's ever been brought up. So fuel wasn't just a Disney era thing. What did you think the ships ran on? I don't know. I mean, what did you think all the ships ran on in the classic trilogy? I'd like to know. So let's see, where else were we? Force communication didn't kill Luke and Leia in The Empire Strikes Back. Why did it kill Luke in The Last Jedi? When Luke and Leia connected in the Empire Strikes Back, that wasn't the way. It wasn't nearly in the same context. And it wasn't Luke force Skyping Leia. It was Luke calling out to her with his feelings and reaching out through the Force to touch her mind to let her know he was still alive and that he needed help. She didn't physically see him sitting in the cockpit on the console in front of him. She just, Luke, I know where Luke is. We have to go back. And it was a feeling. The same way Luke did it in The Last Jedi when Leia was laying in the medical frigate. when she was unconscious. When when she senses him, she's like, Luke. And Luke says, Leia. And that's when he reconnected with the Force. That's the same thing that happened in The Empire Strikes Back. What Luke did with his Force projection, that is what killed him. That is what killed him. That, Kylo even says it toward the beginning of the movie. The first time Rey and Kylo connect, he says, the effort alone would kill you. How are you doing this? The effort alone would kill you. Because she's not trained in the Force. Luke was trained in the Force, and it still killed him. It took everything he had to make that happen. He projected an image of himself light years away, across the galaxy, to a almost perfect image of himself, to the point where he could distract Kylo Ren and the First Order so that the Resistance could get away. That's awesome. He played the distraction. He played the hero. The only person in that Resistance that knew that wasn't the real Luke Skywalker was Leia. That was the only person who didn't know. And it's when he put his hand in her hand to give her the dice and kissed her on the forehead. When she looks up at him and realizes she can't feel him, that he's not actually there, she was the only person. Everybody else in that Resistance saw Luke Skywalker walk out there on that battlefield and face down the First Order with a lightsaber. That's what they saw. Because even Poe made the comment, hell, how did he get in here? How did Luke Skywalker get in here? There's got to be another way out. So they started looking for another way out. Leia was the only one, and Rey probably, once they got on the Falcon and got taken off, Leia probably told Rey what was going on. And Kylo. Kylo knew it wasn't him. But all the rest of the Resistance, all they saw was Luke Skywalker walk out there and face everybody down. And the power that took to project yourself in the Force so strongly that a droid like C-3PO can look at him and go, Master Luke, and a droid can see him. That's saying something. That is, we knew going into The Last Jedi that there were going to be Force powers used that we had never seen before. And we were all sitting around, what kind of Force powers could possibly be used that we've never seen before? That's what it was. Now, granted, there were some versions of it in the EU that I've heard of. And even some time travel Force projection, if I'm not mistaken. But that's something that just, it builds on like what I was saying earlier with Luke. He knew it was going to kill him. He knew it was going to take everything he had and strain his body, and he did it anyway. You know, so that's why there's a difference between what Luke did at the end of Last Jedi and the Force communication, I guess you could say, the sensing of each other from the classic trilogy. There's a difference there. So, moving on, let's see here. When was it established that Force ghosts couldn't interact with the physical world? When was it established that Force ghosts could interact with the physical world? They've always been able to. Obi-Wan did it in The Empire Strikes Back, or not The Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi. When Luke, after Yoda dies and Luke walks out and he says, I can't do this, R2, I can't go on alone. And Obi-Wan walks through the jungle and says, Yoda will always be with you. And he looks up, he says, Obi-Wan. As Obi-Wan's walking through the jungle, there are vines getting pushed out of the way as brushing off his shoulder as he walks in. If he couldn't interact with the world, how is he sitting on a log with Luke Skywalker? I mean, it's manifesting themselves as the Force. It's not a ghost. Ghost, everybody uses the term ghost, and maybe that's not the correct term that we should be using. Maybe not. I mean, I could be wrong. Force ghost isn't maybe technically the right term for what these things are. Because from a certain point of view, when Qui-Gon comes back to Obi-Wan for the last time in Master and Apprentice, the short story Master and Apprentice, it goes through the story. It goes through the process of how he manifests himself. And it's not just wispy light. You know, there's material there. So Yoda bopping Luke on the face with his walking stick or calling down lightning, I don't see anything wrong with that. The whole point of a Force ghost, quote unquote, is, they're made of the Force. They have become one with the Force, but they retain their individuality. When they manifest themselves, they are part of the living Force. They are a manifestation of the Force. And the Force surrounds all living things. Like Yoda said, between the shore and the ship. It's there too. It's in storms. It's in lightning. Why couldn't somebody who is literally the Force and has the entire power of the living Force at their beck and call, why couldn't they call down lightning and burn a tree? They're literally Force beings. Why wouldn't they be able to do that? So, I mean, it was established all the way back in the classic trilogy. Force ghosts can interact with the physical world. This next one is really the only one I can't refute. And it's the why were the turbo laser beams from the finalizer arching in space? That one I have no answer for. I honestly have no answer for that one at all. As far as I'm concerned, laser beams should be going straight. The only thing I can think of is for theatrical effect, because maybe they wanted that feel like ship on ship battle out in the ocean and shooting cannonballs. That's the only thing I can think of, and that the laser beams were. Cause, I mean, that's literally the only thing I can think of. Or the turbo lasers were some kind of different weapon that wasn't shooting actual laser bolts. You know what I mean? So I honestly don't have an answer for that one. And that does kind of irk me even when I watch The Last Jedi. Seeing laser bolts arch. That does irk me. Let's see here. Why is Leia all of a sudden able to use the Force to save herself when we've never seen her use it before? We have seen her use it before. We saw it in the classic trilogy, in The Force Awakens. We saw Leia use the Force. When Luke tells Leia about their bloodline and that they're brother and sister, and he says, "My sister has it. In time, you will learn to use that power the same as I have." We know from the novels that she didn't want to be formally trained as a Jedi. But even at the end of Return of the Jedi, when Han says, I don't think Luke was on that thing when it blew. And she says, he wasn't. I can feel it. She was using the Force. She could feel it. That was the first time that was ever touched on. The Force Awakens, when Han dies, she feels it. Everybody looks at her. What's going on with her? And she sat down and she felt Han's death across the galaxy. The same way she knew Luke made it off the Death Star. She's a Skywalker. She is a Skywalker. Why wouldn't she be able to use the Force? She had some preliminary training, but it wasn't anything that she could go do what Luke does and wield a lightsaber against stormtroopers or battle droids or whatever. But in that moment where it was fight or flight and it was the end of her life, it's the end of her life, she fought. It just goes to show the character strength of Leia. You know, now how they got the bridge door open to let her in without everything getting sucked out into space, I don't know. That's a question for a different time. But her using the Force to pull herself toward the ship, I don't see anything wrong with that. They could have done something different with the pose so she didn't look like Mary Poppins floating through space. I do agree with that. But there's nothing wrong with Leia using the Force to pull herself towards the ship. You know, and people saying, well, how did she survive the explosion? The Force. I mean, that's really, it all comes back to the Force. You know, right before those missiles hit, when she looks up at the camera and takes that deep breath, it's her prepping herself for that explosion. She knew it was coming. If in the EU, Jedi can put themselves into a Force coma and survive for months on end in the cockpit of a starfighter before they're found, why the hell can't Leia wrap herself in a Force cocoon at the last second and protect herself from a quick fire explosion and then just sucked out into space? Why not? I mean, why not? This isn't the first time we've seen a Star Wars character get sucked out into space, too, and a Jedi, if I might add. Kanan in Rebels, sucked out into space by Darth Maul. He survived. You know, it's crazy to think that people, and I'm not saying that you, Kylie, are guilty of this, but there are people out there who really want to bash on the Last Jedi, but the same things they're bashing on happen in the classic trilogy or in other Star Wars material that they claim to like. You know, so let's see here. I think there was one more. No, that was the last one. But yeah, I hope that answers some of your questions. You know, and hopefully, I don't want to say I mean, I hope you like The Last Jedi after this, but it's one of those things where I hope I was able to explain those enough to where they're more acceptable to you, and you don't hate the film as much. I mean, it's still a Star Wars movie, and I don't see these as flaws. The only flaw I see is the blaster bolt arching thing. That's the only thing I see as a flaw. You know? And some of this stuff, you have to have some level of a suspension of disbelief, because it's a science fiction film. It's a sci-fi movie. It's a movie. You know, I think on the last episode I did, we were talking about some of the physics in the Star Wars galaxy. We don't know that they're all the same. I assumed they were for that video, but we don't know that they're all the same. You're talking about a universe that has lightsabers and the Force. That goes against all physics. So I don't get why some of these things, you know, are a big deal. Why we're picking apart a sci-fi film like it's supposed to be happening in our galaxy with our with our laws of physics, you know, based off of what we know. I don't get it. If everything in Star Wars made scientific sense, the space battles, silent. You wouldn't hear a blaster bolt. You wouldn't hear an engine roaring. Nothing. You wouldn't hear it. There'd be no music. No music. If you're watching it as it's happening, no music. It's so all these things that we don't like about films that make no sense. That's the magic of movies. Because only in movies can you do stuff that goes against the laws of physics. That's fantasy, where you can see what would happen if this was going to go on. You know? And another thing people bring up a lot with The Last Jedi, and I thought I'd touch on this too real quick. Why all of a sudden now we know how to hyperdrive ships into other ships, you know, and kamikaze them? Now that's a big deal? It's not that it's new technology or a new tactic. It's just she's the first one that we ever saw do it. Holdo, she sat down and she was trying to figure out how to take out that ship. And the only way she knew how, she already knew she was going to die. The only way she knew how to take out that ship was to light speed through that sumbitch. And that's exactly what she did. Just because it only happened for the first time in episode 8 doesn't mean, why did they never do that before? Nobody had the balls to do it, maybe? Nobody thought of it? Just because somebody has a new idea later on in a series doesn't reflect badly on those before that didn't have that idea. So it's just, she worked with what she had at the moment. She made a quick decision and she took off. So I hope that answers some of your questions. And don't get me wrong, there are some flaws with the movie. I do agree with that. But I don't think they're to the extent everybody is giving that movie shit. So thank you for the question, Kylie. I do appreciate it. And like I said, I do hope that answers some of... I hope it changes your opinion on some of the things that happened in the film.